Okay, take it away, guys.
All right. DC. Hey everyone, good afternoon. Hope we're all having a wonderful time. We are Group 1, obviously, and our presentation is going to be on the themes of invisibility, obviously within Afrofuturism, and then within the archival text. So we'll get right into it. So the two pieces of text that we looked at, we were looking at the Gutenberg Grapevine, which we read in this class, if you guys recall, and then the archival text that we chose is called Old Friends by Daryl Schweitzer. And it's kind of a poem. We'll get introduced to that later, so we all kind of know we're on the same page and we know what we're talking about. While we were looking at these, our preliminary research question was, how do these two authors elaborate on the theme of invisibility, whether that be Afrofuturism's invisibility or just the theme of invisibility within their two texts, to show how these unseen actions of specific groups affect the past, the present, and the future. So the thesis we came out of with this was the contributions and actions of the groups, as far as Afrofuturism is concerned. African Americans are forgotten, and they're very forgotten, and it helps shape the new world and the lookout of the future.
So the Gutenberg Grapevine was actually Chestnut's first nationally published work of fiction, and it was published in 1877 to The Atlantic, and it marked the first time that an African American's work was published to the magazine. And so after that, he was able to publish to more and more companies and get more and more of his works published. And he continued to write until the 1920s or so, where he was eventually eclipsed by Harlem Renaissance writers. And so Charles Chestnut was one of the many African American writers who played a role towards the African American movement. And he essentially was one of the invisible driving forces towards their movement.
So just kind of a brief recap of Gutenberg Grapevine for anyone who's kind of forgotten. It's written by Charles Chestnut, as Octavian hit on, in 1887, extremely old text. It begins with John and Annie, this white couple from Ohio. Annie's sick, and they need to move down south per the doctor's orders. They want to own a vineyard down there, so they're going around property shopping, all that good stuff. And they run into this slave in the North Carolina vineyard that they're looking at. He tells them this elaborate story of how the slave owner, McAdoo, used to drive his slaves extremely hard, and there was a hex put on the grapevine so he could make more money, and he later died in the Civil War, and kind of implying that it's a cursed property, they really should not buy it. And then the story abruptly ends with John and Annie deciding to buy it. We don't know what happens to him, but you can kind of imply that the future is not looking bright for them.
Okay, so there are different invisible forces that are kind of being acted upon in the Gutenberg Grapevine. So the first is white schema, and this kind of was when John and Annie kind of already had a prejudice against Julius when he first started talking to them. And so even though he had all this advice towards them and told them the story of how they probably should stay away from the Gutenberg Grapevine, they still went against his advice. Also, when John and Annie first went and sat on the bench with Julius kind of got up and was embarrassed that he was on the same bench as them. So obviously there are these like preconditioned prejudice towards whites and blacks, which kind of play an effect.
So the second invisible force we like to look at is stereotypes. And more specifically, we like to look at the speech patterns of Uncle Julius. Because when John and Annie first met him and they heard him speak, they didn't really think he was educated, so they didn't really trust him.
The other invisible force that we like to look at in this text was the forced labor. Obviously, the forced labor itself, you can see it happening, but more of the effect that it had. We've kind of hit on that in this class a lot. The South would not be what it was. The country as a whole would not be what it was without this forced labor. So the invisible underminings of that working to better everyone else's lives. So that's obviously prevalent in this text.
One strongly crucial part of the Gutenberg Grapevine that manifests itself consistently throughout this tale is the presence of magical forces, the arcane arts that surround the entire context of the house itself. The vineyard being placed under a powerful hex by the slave owner. These manipulating forces that are privy to African lore and culture and culture in the sense that he's now using something similar to voodoo in order to actually manipulate the very Africans who are responsible for the tropes and ideologies of something such as that. The hex, although the protagonist does not believe that it's even minorly effective, it still lingers on the vineyard to this very day, giving it the ideology that it may be hidden away from the narrator's perspective, yet so it holds heavy gravity on how this entire story is driven. Without it, there is no story. One bit of evidence that seems to support the ideology of the secretion of black culture and black culture's ideologies and even their very premises functions on the Afrofuturist analysis of the story of Invisible Man. Invisible Man, it's basically a story about how one person from a foreign context attempts to assimilate into another culture and finds himself at odds with the entire thing, relating to the whole black idea of dissonance within a culture. Two heavily emphasized black ideologies within Afrofuturism that are touched upon and combated as well are the whitewashed visions of tomorrow, the ideology that most of Afrofuturism, as well as much of the American experience, is molded not by the action of foreigners, such as African Americans, but rather yet just white people in general, and equating blackness with failure of progress, equating African American Afrofuturism ideologies towards the lack of creativity and progress towards a greater society, which is completely untrue. In the origins of one particular context of the Goofer Grapevine, voodoo, it appears as though voodoo is traced back to the African animist cultures that related to somewhat of this world's type of Native American views. Spirits that roam the entire world, that with a predisposition for nature in order to control all facets of life. Upon arriving in the Americas, these slaves were stripped down of their religion, but some carried it on, and later on the cultural fusion between the religion of Americanized beliefs and African beliefs rose into a medley. The assimilation and fusion of both cultures led to the creation of what we know as Western voodoo. Yet so many do not even know how far its significance stretches in this modern day and age. Over the last 25 years, we've had over just about a thousand works of voodoo based on things such as vampire spirits and ungodly forces that roam this planet. At other times, we have $927 million worth of revenue invested into this one ideology, as it contributes to all others. In the end, it may not seem like anyone would know this, but it also contributes heavily to both the American economy. As an Afrofuturist ideology, it heavily contributes to the American canon as a whole.
The last piece of supporting evidence that we looked at for those 4 points that we had earlier, this one has to do with the forced labor aspect of things and the invisibility behind that. So we found a very, very interesting text done by this man named Sloan Irving and his team. And what they did is, his hypothesis was the American education system completely discounts and discredits the work done by minorities that's forced, whether that be through railroads, slavery, all these wonderful things that were just absolutely terrible, and the education system doesn't give them their justice. So what his team did is they looked around in different aspects of the American culture. They went to different regions and looked at the textbooks that schools were using to teach, obviously, high school, college, middle school kids, and they totally discredit the work that was forced upon these people. So it goes into detail about how discredited the slave works are and everything. And it was very helpful for our theme, because our whole argument is that the forced labor, the invisible acts of forced labor, pushed society to a new level. It affected the past, it's affecting the present, and it will affect the future. So that was a very, very interesting thing that helped our argument.
So the second artifact piece we had was Old Friends, which was in the 2002 fanzine, and it kind of focuses on friends that have gone in our past and they kind of molded us how we are today, but we kind of forget about them. So it goes, we dead leave no footprints in the snow. And when we summon you to the door, you say it's the wind, or rustling ivy, or a dry branch scraping a window pane. We wait voiceless in the dark, in our hunger and our rage, for you to wander out that door, or lean out the window into the night. For we are your ineradicable past and your inescapable future. So Schweitzer kind of plays on invisibility, and these old friends being invisible to you today, but they still have an effect.
So we would just like to focus on some of the specific lines that we think really focus on the impact of invisible works of others. And we're going to go ahead and touch on these in later slides, but we just like to emphasize them now because we think they draw numerous parallels with the Afrofuturist theme of invisibility, which ties very well with Great Grapevine. And so the lines we're going to look at today. And when we summon you to the door, you say it's wind or rustling ivy. We wait voiceless in the dark in our hunger and our rage. And for we're your ineradicable past and your inescapable future. So the first line we're going to look at says, and when we summon you to the door, you say it's wind or rustling ivy. So these old friends are essentially being forgotten and perceived as wind and rustling ivy. And these forgotten individuals aren't even considered to be the source of the ominousness because they're essentially completely forgotten, just as African Americans often are.
So the next line is, we wait voiceless in the dark in our hunger and our rage. So if they're voiceless in the dark, you can't really hear them and you can't really see them. So there's really no way of telling where they are or what they've done. This kind of goes back to what John was saying about the forced labor. If we're not really taught about the impact that the slaves had during the plantation era, then we can't really know what they did. So in their hunger, their hunger kind of implies that these friends have been forgotten about, they weren't given the correct gratitude they deserved, and people didn't appreciate what kind of impact they had on their lives. So in the same way that these slaves were kind of stripped of their rights and their human necessities and just treated like animals. And so for their rage, because they were so neglected, they kind of want to strike back at the people who kind of ruled above them, or the people whose friends that forgot about them. And what's interesting about this line is that it actually reverses the role of invisibility. So instead of people being invisible and you forgetting about them, and it being a bad thing for invisibility, it's actually a good thing for them because they're able to take their revenge and take their rage out on you, and you can't really do anything about it because they're invisible.
In the next line, for we are your ineradicable past and your inescapable future. Although forgotten, the actions of these people, these relics, these unknown facets of history, they still carry strong gravity on the present day as it stands. Each and every one of their contributions to a subject, a people, of a nation, they still stand as a driving force that motivated and changed our society progressively over time, similar to Afrofuturism and the Buford that changed the vineyard in the grapevine. Although the new protagonists do not believe Uncle Julius in his screeds about how the plantation is now haunted. They are subject to the dissonance that surrounds the next generation versus the contributions of the previous one, as the previous master ended up in a bold mistake, tampered with the things that he shouldn't have, which led to his demise. All of this is tantamount to the experiences of African American as they sought stake in the American experience and a part of general history, yet so are often ignored in many subjects, such as Afrofuturism.
And kind of in summary, we have, as I hope you picked up on throughout this presentation, we were looking at the theme of invisibility within Cooper Grapevine and then within the Old Friends text. So even though both of these texts are extremely different, I mean, they're written about different topics, they're over 100 years, about 130 years apart, they still hit on the same sort of theme of invisibility and how these invisible acts shape the past, present, and future. So they both focus on the small group's actions that may have been forgotten or eradicated, and how even though society may be adjured to the role that their work is gone and played in modeling the world, it's still a very, very prevalent thing. And then by putting the work of the world on their backs, these forgotten groups or prejudiced groups have been able to shape the future and will continue to. And texts like this help exemplify that.
Okay, any questions for our group?
Would you say the second poem by yeah, okay. Was there a supernatural element to that, or was it mainly just a kind of like a mind thing? Or was it there actually like ghosts?
It seems to be ambiguous to tell, as Gerald Schweitzer seems to leave it completely up to the interpreter as a whole, whether or not the forces are corporeal, or the people who lie in wait now as the new generation takes hold, or if they're just merely an invisible force that manifests itself as another idea. Someone could assume it's a similar scenario to God, angels, and all the other thing, or they could assume it's a similar situation to parents and children.
Also, one thing that when we were reading through it the first time, we all kind of got different grasps of it, and I read it as almost addiction, being old friends, because it's always haunting. It's always there. It's shaped your past, obviously, and it's going to come back to shape your future. So, I mean, you can look at it in a whole bunch of different ways, but we focused on that.
Yeah, so you interpreted, I see how you interpreted the poem as more malevolently. The old friends are shaping your future and how they shaped your past. Do you think there's also like a benevolence to the old friends and how they positively affect your future and the past?
Okay, so I thought most of it was malevolent because in the beginning line they mention how they're forgotten. So it's not that they're gone and you still appreciate them, but they're gone. But they're just forgotten. So
That's going to be the benevolence in the sense that it's a mistake that now haunts a person. Its presence in the person's memory prevents them from doing it over and over again. Yet, so if they forget, all memory of the lesson they learned will be lost.
What if we interpret it literally as the dead?
I definitely don't think it's going to be a happy twist.
Well, yeah, so I think this is really pertinent to what you guys are talking about in terms of the history of how oppressed people have been treated. Like, what if another way we can look at this poem is that it's referring to those who have died. And many of those who have died in pretty nasty circumstances, right? What do you think about that?
Perhaps it's a lesson to the new generation not to repeat the mistakes of the old, change the world for the better, make the world for the better so that it does not meander on to create the same suffering that the first generation was victim to.
And maybe part of what's malevolent about this poem is the suggestion that the new generation isn't listening?
Right?
Yeah. Other questions for these guys?
So it's probably like a mix of both, but you've got these sort of magical effects in these stories that just go very, very fun. Do you think they're more of sort of like taking culture and sort of putting it, making it more extreme for the purpose of storytelling, or do you think it's more used as a symbol for other things? Does that make sense? Because the magical, because it's science fiction, it's impossible for these things to actually occur. So is it more for just cultural value, or more of just to approximate things you can't tell in the story, to bring forth through similar?
So I want to make sure you guys answer this question, but I just want to make sure we understand what your question is. Are you asking whether the use of magic in these stories is meant to be perceived as real or as a metaphor?
Obviously it can't be real. So is it more of a metaphor? Or more
I don't think it's obvious.
Well,
Yeah,
Go ahead, guys. What do you think?
I mean, as far as the voodoo culturalism and everything, I think, yes, it is definitely a whole idea of culture within it. I obviously it's science fiction, just as you hit on. It's probably it's fiction. So I do. What was the question? I mean, I don't.
Well, I mean,
Sam, go ahead.
You're basically agreeing with both sides of it, which is kind of what I see too. Like it's both culture and metaphor. You know what I mean?
So if the question is, do these things reflect the realities of these cultures, or are they a metaphor?
Or not the realities, but like taking the culture, making it more extreme.
Okay, so the question is, do we think that this is a representation of what we believe African Americans in these cultures actually believe, or do we think it's being blown up for fictional effect? Is that your question, Sam?
Basically, it's not a very good question.
Whatever you want to, it's magic.
I mean, I think what that question gets at is, you know, to what extent are we to believe that the creators of this work think it's true, right? Think it's real? Is it expected to be just fictional? I mean, what do you think in the case of the Gooper Grapevine guys? Do you think that Chestnut doesn't intend us to believe that this voodoo stuff is real?
Well, Chestnut, in his own way, is presenting every element of the Gooper Grapevine satirically. He's playing at everyone's preconceived notions of voodoo, magic, even the ideology that black people talk the way that Uncle Julius does. Whereas in reality, all of this just isn't exactly